welcome to Tea and Strumpets, a Regency romance review. I'm Zoe.
And I'm Kelsey.
So, Kelsey, today we actually have an because in our last episode, which was our list of 2020 historical romances we just can't wait for, we actually said the title of one of the books wrong.
Oh, man. I thought we researched this.
And by we, you mean me. So somehow I wrote A Rogue of Her Own for Evie Dunmore's new book that's coming out in September, and it's actually A Rogue of One's Own.
Oh.
And so I think that distinction is important. So apologies.
I think that's a fair distinction.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. The choice of the title. I like it. And I am so sorry, Evie, for that. So I know she forgives us, but I still wanted to make it right in the world. And there was something else that as I was editing the episode, I had quite the realization.
Okay.
So it has to do with Lorraine Heath's two books, because I think the reason I didn't realize this to begin with is because the second book that Lorraine Heath has coming out next year is called When Beauty Tempts the Beast, right? And that is Beast's book. Mm-hmm. Well, what I really didn't realize, even after talking about Fancy's book having a belle dress on the cover, is that it's like 100% a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Like, let me just lay out these facts for you, Kelsey.
Okay.
First of all, he's the, I think, Earl or something of Rosemont.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Second of all, she runs a bookshop, so she loves books.
Uh-huh.
Third of all, he's like a grumpy guy who is pretending to be something that he's not, right? So it's like the whole idea of like the transformation. I'm like, what? This must be a Beauty and the Beast. How did I miss it? Do you agree?
It does sound very much like it, but I think okay, fair enough.
I just like can't believe she would put out two Beauty and the Beasts in 1 year. But at the same time, like, yes, as many as you want, Lorraine, go for it.
I mean, yes, but I don't know. Maybe Beast's book isn't going to be a cliched Beauty and the Beast retelling.
Maybe that was
because I don't think we had a synopsis of it. Like,
we do
it
not.
may be Beauty Tempts the Beast because that's just a nice, clever title because that's his name in the book. But it could be that that's completely far away from a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and then Fancy's is the real one. So maybe she's just tricking us.
I know. You know what? Whatever it may be, I am excited for both of them still. So I know we could talk about that all day long. However, we do have a book that we read this week. And before we jump into that book, I have a question for you, Kelsey.
Lay it on me. So,
Kelsey, do you enjoy celebrity gossip?
Okay. So I am not one that's like, I'm not going to watch TMZ. I really don't follow a lot of celebrities on Twitter or on Instagram or anything. But I will say, when I'm standing in line at the grocery store and you see like the Us Weekly and the Whatever Today and the yada da ya, I'm like, And I will say I have flipped through a couple of those magazines in the past just to see if the headline is as scandalous as they make it seem. And usually it's not. And I really think like you can take it with a grain of salt. But those headlines are snappy, man. And I will say I like to call it plain reading. Like, if you're going to get, like, a tabloidy magazine or something like that, that's, like, your perfect commuter flight. Like, if I was flying, usually, I mean, granted, I'm flying with my husband, but, like, if I was flying from San Francisco to LA by myself, like, I might just buy one of those and, like, slip through it really quick because I can get through it in one plane ride.
Yeah, that is probably the perfect commuter flight length. So, for me, I very rarely go to the grocery store anymore because either my husband does the shopping, heck yes, or we order our groceries because we're millennials. No, but regardless, like I can't help but be drawn to those headlines when you see them. And there is something just undeniable about celebrity gossip. And like, even though I don't have cable TV, like I know who the Kardashians are. And I like somehow like that like gets absorbed into the zeitgeist, right? Like you know that these people exist even peripherally. And while I do not care at all about them, I do have like one small subset that I sort of kind of care about, which is like all of like Bachelor Nation.
Well, they have lots of good celebrity gossip that gets put in those magazines.
They do. And while I don't read the magazines, I follow many of them on Instagram because they're just like fascinating to me. And yeah, I am a Bachelor watcher, but I love it because my husband and I watch it together and we just have a great time. There's definitely some problematic stuff in there, but it's
entertainment is entertainment. And I mean, The Bachelor and Bachelorette and all those spin-offs have been on for so long that really there's obviously something to it.
And I would love to get into The Bachelor and The Bachelorette and Bachelor in Paradise and talk all about that kitsch and camp and drama. But we are not here to talk about that sort of celebrity gossip today.
Oh, no. We are talking about the best kind.
The queen of gossip.
Lady Whistledown.
Heck yes. So the book that we are talking about today includes a lot of Lady Whistledown stuff, you guys. And I will say, if you have not yet read this book, there is a big reveal in this book. And if you would like to read it before knowing the identity of Lady Whistledown herself, then go read this book because we're going to spoil it all. And I want to say that up front because I think anybody who listens knows we talk about the whole book, but this book in general has a lot of twists and turns and interesting character development. And I highly recommend you read this series before you listen to us.
Yes, I 100% agree. Like, if you were even thinking about reading this book, I think that you definitely should pause right now and read it for yourself because like we are going to spoil it in a big way. So
I will say that if you have read it or if you're not taking our advice, strap in. This is going to be one heck of a fun ride because this book just rocks. And I'm saying it at the beginning because, I mean, I can't not. So we do have a few author facts this week. So let us get stuck in, as the Brits would say.
Yes. So Julia Quinn gives a thank you to a couple of fellow authors in the foreword. And so she shouts out Lisa Kleypas and Stephanie Lawrence. So on her website, you can actually find out why, because if you're like me and you read a lot and a lot of times you forget characters, or maybe you haven't read these things yet, but she does give little Easter eggs of her fellow author friends in a couple of the chapters in this book. So in chapter 1 of Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, Penelope is reading a book called Matilda by S.R. Fielding. And this book played a big role in Dreaming of You by Lisa Kleypas. So SR is actually Sarah, who's the heroine of that book. And in the Lady Whistledown column opening chapter 9, Julia mentions Michael Anstruther Weatherby, who is the brother of Honora Anstruther Weatherby, the heroine of Devil's Bride, which is the first book of Stephanie Lawrence's Spinster series. So
fun.
They get their acknowledgement at the beginning of the book. And I just love that these authors are friends. Like, it's just a fun way to incorporate other characters from other authors into her own work. So I just thought it was really cute and I loved it.
Very cool. I totally agree. One other thing that I found in the author's notes at the end of the book was a little note from Julia Quinn about how she writes about writing, because that's a big part of this book, because we find out that our hero is actually a writer. He just doesn't even quite know it yet because he's been recording all of his travels in his journals. And there is a particular section, and I know we're going to talk about it as we talk through the synopsis, but I was just so blown away with her descriptions from the character about what it was like during his time in Cyprus. And it just seemed so personal. And turns out that it was, because she wrote, quote, "One of my summer jobs in college was working as a travel writer for Let's Go, Greece and Turkey. I spent 7 weeks on Crete, Cyprus, and a couple of the islands in the Dodecanese. I should have looked that up beforehand, but I didn't. And I'm sorry, those of you who know what I'm trying to say know how I should be pronouncing it. So apologies there." Anyhow, she continues with, "I drew upon my memories of Cyprus for Colin's writings. His descriptions of Scotland are mine as well, drawn from my visit in the spring of 2001. So really cool. I mean, it just makes sense because they feel so vivid and real.
Mm-hmm.
So I really liked that. And also, just last week, Julia Quinn posted a new essay about the Bridgertons and basically her romance writer origin story on her blog. And it's really a fantastic piece with some great insight about the book we're actually reading today. And it's really hard to pick a quote from it, but she talks about how she came up with the idea of Lady Whistledown and how that came to be and how Lady Whistledown is a writer's dream. So I just really recommend that you all take a look at that essay. We're going to link to it in our show notes and also on our blog. So you should definitely check it out. It is fantastic.
Absolutely. You totally should.
We also have some history facts this week because we're talking a lot about Lady Whistledown in this book, and she had a circulation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about newspapers and news during the Regency. So despite heavy taxation, high cost, and government censorship, which included prosecution for libel, newspapers were really banging in the Regency time period. So in the year of 1816, there were 31 national newspapers, including 14 in London. And some of them were daily papers. Some of them were weekly, biweekly, evening versus not. But there were, 31 at least. So
dang, that's a lot.
And the cost of these newspapers was a very expensive 7 pence. And it was estimated that because of the high cost of these newspapers, each paper passed through 20 pairs of hands. And they were also available, of course, at like coffee houses and circulating libraries. So what Lady Whistledown was doing with her circulation was definitely something of the time. And what I also found during my research was there may have been at least one real life Lady Whistledown.
Ooh.
So I have a few quotes here from some articles, and I'm going to properly cite them in our show notes. So if you want to find that, please head to our blog for the correct citings on all those there. But reporters often purchased their juicy tidbits from servants less than loyal to their masters and gentlemen and ladies willing to expose their friends. Purchasing gossip could get expensive. Blackmail was much cheaper.
Oh, dang.
Some newspapers were known to take money to not print some embarrassing incident, which might or might not actually even be true. One of the most notorious of such journalists was Theodore Hook. He lost a great deal of money in a government job when a clerk under him embezzled money he was responsible for. To make up for lost income, Hook started the Sunday newspaper, the John Bull. Unlike another newspaper family, the Hunts, he sided with the Prince Regent. Not a bad idea considering his situation. In his paper, he freely criticized prominent Whigs and even Queen Caroline and her attendants. Even more endearing, while not above paying for gossip, Hook gleaned most of his information by keeping his identity as editor of the John Bull a secret and essentially spying on his friends and connections. Ooh, sounds familiar?
That does sound familiar. This is very funny because I do know that they have definitely used some of the ideas of like paying to not let gossip come out. I know that that's definitely been used in romance novels before. So,
oh, yes. So anyhow, I can't wait to get on into this. So let's talk about our tropes.
Yes. Our main tropes are unrequited love, friends to lovers, secrets, and ugly duckling.
Oh, so true.
Yeah.
And our main characters today finally are
Penelope Featherington and Colin Bridgerton.
Oh, the tons.
Yay.
I am so ready to get started. Shall we?
We shall. So, Penelope Featherington met and fell in love with Colin Bridgerton when she was 16. At the age of 21, she had the bad timing to hear Colin profusely proclaim that he would not be marrying Penelope Featherington.
As listeners may remember from our last Bridgerton episode.
Yes. As Anthony walked her home, she suggested maybe Colin should travel, which he did for most of the next 7 years. And Penelope was placed firmly on the shelf. So Penelope is now 28 years old. And Penelope knew that she was destined to remain a spinster. It wouldn't be fair to marry someone when she was still so desperately in love with Colin. When he was in town, he always saved a dance and a smile for Penelope, and somehow she managed to pretend that nothing had ever happened, that he'd never declared his distaste for her on a public street, that her dreams had never been shattered.
Poor Penelope.
Yes.
And it is also interesting to note that as Penelope is 28 years old, we are jumping into the Bridgerton universe 11 years after Daphne's book.
Mm-hmm.
So quite a bit of time has passed. So now we're getting really into our story as Penelope is starting to rethink her spinsterhood at 28 years of age. Her mother is also talking more and more about how nice it will be to have Penelope around to care for her in her old age because Penelope's 2 older sisters have finally married and her younger one is on the market.
Yes, and her youngest one is proclaimed the beauty of the family, so they know she'll make a fact. In fact, she's practically engaged as it is. However, her mother was reading the morning's edition of Whistledown and has found that Colin Bridgerton is returned from his most recent trip. And since Felicity is only practically engaged, she's not actually engaged. So wouldn't that be fun? And what a coup it would be if those two got together?
No, it would not be okay, according to Penelope. She's pretty aghast. And not only because she's still hopelessly in love with Colin, but because Felicity is best friends with Hyacinth, who is Colin's younger sister by a good number of years.
Yes.
And it just feels a little bit incestuous to Penelope.
Yeah. A little bit later, Penelope is in her room when Eloise Bridgerton lets herself in, which is very normal as the 2 girls basically make themselves at home in each other's house. So Penelope is quite the figure at number 5, which is Lady Bridgerton's house. And Eloise is known at the Featherington house. So they just basically treat the other's house as their own.
And Eloise tells Penelope how Colin has returned from Cyprus, which is not Greece, as was reported in Whistledown. And this leads Eloise to start talking about Whistledown and think about all that she knows. And there must be a way to find out who she is, such as maybe scanning her back issues for clues, because there is no way that this woman has managed to keep all traces of themselves from this column. But before she can speculate more on this, Eloise must head off to Bridgerton House for tea with the whole family.
Colin is already at Bridgerton House, enjoying some brandy with Anthony, who is asking him about his trip. And Colin, while he's talking with Anthony, is ruminating on how nice it is to be home. And it also tends to remind him that he feels kind of purposeless. He doesn't really have any desire to marry, so he's not really there to get married. However, he doesn't have anything else going on for him other than his nice personality, which is partly why he travels. It's his way to escape the ton and to not be reminded that he's not like his brothers. Anthony manages the whole family's estates and earnings, and then Benedict, he's married and has kids, but now he's also a well-renowned painter. And Colin's like, cool, I'm just the charming brother.
In fact, his internal dialogue is he wanted a purpose. He wanted a legacy. He wanted, if not to know, then to at least hope that when he was gone, he'd be memorialized in some manner other than in Lady Whistledown's society papers. So we've kind of, up until this point in the Bridgerton series, known Colin to kind of be the carefree, happy-go-lucky comedic relief. And we're starting to find out pretty much from the beginning that Colin's got a little bit more going on in there.
Yes. That night is Lady Bridgerton's birthday ball, and Penelope is enjoying the food, particularly an eclair, which is just heavenly. And she's thinking to herself that this is probably one of the most enjoyable things about being a spinster. First, she doesn't have to stand around hoping someone will ask her to dance. And second, she doesn't have to endure boring conversations. And while she's moaning to herself about how this eclair she's eating is particularly good, Colin pops up with that good, eh? After a little small talk, Penelope feels that familiar ease come between her and Colin. Maybe Penelope had thought on more than one occasion part of the reason she loved him was that he made her feel comfortable with herself.
So they have a really delightful exchange where they chat about his travels and they tease each other and overall just have a great rapport. And so we as the readers just get to know Colin and Penelope.
And Colin is reminded by how much he likes Penelope. She's witty and has the ability to startle him in a very good way. So, in his own words, when Penelope was in the company of someone with whom she felt comfortable, and Colin realized that he was probably privileged to count himself among that number, she had a very dry wit, a sly smile, and evidence of a very intelligent mind indeed.
And from that revelation, Colin asks Penelope to dance. And listeners will remember that Lady Bridgerton was also a wallflower. And so that's why she encouraged her sons to dance with the wallflowers so much. But Penelope says, you don't need to dance with me. I'm no longer an obligation. I am a spinster. I'm firmly on the shelf. And Colin protests and he's like, no, that's not the reason I dance with you. And then he realizes that, maybe he did. But he insists this time on enjoying a dance together. So they head out on the dance floor and have a pretty fun dance with each other.
They do. And after they leave the dance floor, they are greeted by Lady Danbury.
Ooh.
Lady Danbury was aiming for Colin, but she likes Penelope and promptly tells Colin he was smart to dance with her because she's not half dumb, that one.
And the best part of Lady Danbury is that she totally knows who she is. She is the dragon of the ton and relishes that power. And it totally comes across in the conversation. So with the addition of a few more partygoers to their conversation circle, they eventually get to how tedious the season has been this year. It's such this is one of my favorite Lady Whistledown articles where she talks about how hopelessly banal and dreadfully boring the whole season is. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, nothing very exciting has happened in a while except talking about being bored. Penelope, in fact, shrugs and says, I think the lot of you are having a jolly good time talking about how bored you are.
And apparently the most interesting thing is reading Whistledown, which leads to the pronouncement that sweeps the ball in 3 minutes. Penelope was by the clock and was able to count. Lady Danbury issues a challenge to unmask Lady Whistledown by the end of the season for £1,000.
Oof.
So after that 3 minutes, Lady Danbury is holding court and she is boldly asking people who they think Whistledown is. And she turns to Penelope, who brazenly tells her, because she's already mentioned it to Colin on the side, and then suddenly Lady Danbury turned to her and is like, who do you think it is? And Penelope, who normally wouldn't say such a thing, is like, you know what? I feel brave today. And she says she believes Lady Danbury could be Whistledown. To which she gets the response, I like you, Penelope Featherington, Lady Danbury said, tapping her right on the toe with her cane. I wager half the ballroom is of the same notion, but no one has had the mettle to tell me so.
And this reaction shocks Penelope, but what shocks her even further is what Lady Danbury carries on to say, and is truly one of the great quotes in romance books, I think, in general. Mm-hmm. And Lady Danbury says, isn't it nice, the older lady said, leaning in so that Penelope could hear her words, to discover that we're not exactly what we thought we were.
And as the next day is Monday, Penelope heads over to number 5 to meet the Bridgerton ladies for tea, as is her habit. Today, she's feeling a little whimsical, and so she decides to cut across Berkeley Square so she can enjoy her shoes squitching in that wet grass. And she's kind of humming to herself and singing a little bit. And her words are kind of like, something more. Maybe I'm something more. When all of a sudden she hears a male voice call her name. Who should it be?
Of course, it's Colin. He has come across her in her private moment And he asks if she was dancing because he's never gone for a dance in Berkeley Square. And at first, Penelope is going to tell him that, of course, she wasn't dancing and kind of brush it off and continue on her way. But then Lady Danbury's voice is in her head. So she decides to go for it and be in on the joke. She is looking to be something more. So she smiled a smile she didn't think she'd even known how to smile. It was wicked, and she was mysterious. And she knew it wasn't all in her head because Colin's eyes widened markedly as she murmured, "That's a shame. It's rather enjoyable."
And this is a turning point for Colin in a few ways. He then says it must be his dance. So now he wants to dance with her in public. However, Penelope, while she wants to have fun with the joke, is like, no, we can't actually dance here because, you know, I'm a spinster and you're quite eligible in the ton. And the thing is, people are going to think we're together because we're doing something so ridiculous in public together. And inevitably, when it comes out that we're not, I'm going to suffer for it. You will have no repercussions, but I will. And Colin has never really thought about it that way, but it's true. The ton would think that he broke it off, and it would hurt Penelope's reputation. And this bothers him in a real way that, like, Penelope wouldn't be thought of in a good light. He realized the last thing he wanted to do was hurt Penelope Featherington. She was his sister's best friend, and moreover, she was, plain and simple, a very nice girl.
So after this kind of weird back and forth, Colin decides that they should start anew. Not 12 years anew, but as people who are being reacquainted now that they are older. Mm-hmm. So they begin their whole exchange from greeting each other in the park that morning and forgetting the bit about dancing, which leads to a very male concern as he realizes, where is her maid? And Penelope's like, I live right around the corner. I'm 28 years old. I'm on the shelf. I don't need a maid, especially in Mayfair. Eloise does the same thing. She comes over, I go over. Like, you can ask her. She's also in the same state as me. And Colin replies, Eloise, he said with an uncharacteristic high-handedness, should be married by now. Now, that was really too much, especially in that tone of voice. Some might say, Penelope returned with a self-righteous little tilt of her chin, that you should be married by now, too.
This leads Colin to be like, he doesn't need to be reminded. His mother will do the reminding for him, especially since they're continuing on to number 5 after this exchange. So they go to tea, and the talk of the drawing room is the mystery of who Whistledown is.
It is Whistledown and marriage. So to be honest, the same thing as the last 11 years.
Yeah, pretty much the same.
But a couple of days later, Penelope heads to number 5 to meet up with Eloise. And when she arrives, she is told that Eloise is out. And Penelope says, you know, she'll just wait. So she's shown up to the private drawing room where they normally take their tea. And she starts to settle down when she notices that there is a book with handwritten words on the table.
And overcome with curiosity, she takes a peek and is immediately swept away as it turns out to be Colin Bridgerton's travel journal. And she's debating whether or not she should turn the page, and in fact is reaching to turn the page when Colin comes back into the room and is furious to see that she's reading his private journal. And it was very clear from the beginning of the words it was his private journal, but Penelope couldn't help herself. And he's demanding to know what she is doing and why she's in the upstairs drawing room.
And she's just like, I'm waiting for Eloise. I'm always put here. Like, I'm so sorry. But Colin is really annoyed and says he'll go. And Penelope keeps trying to apologize, but Colin has officially lost his temper, and she has never seen him lose his temper. And it really throws her into a bit of a loop because she has had such an idealized view of him. So in the midst of all the arguing, Colin stabs himself with a letter opener, which actually gets the mood calmed down. So they doctor the finger and the butler brings sandwiches. And now that tempers are lower, Penelope takes a moment to tell Colin how much she loved what he wrote. She tells him, Sometimes, she finally continued, when one reads a passage of description, it's rather, detached, clinical even. You brought the island to life. Other people might call the water warm, but you related it to something we all know and understand. It made me feel as if I were there, dipping my toe in right alongside you.
Colin is really intrigued by how much she liked his journals, and now he really doesn't want her to leave. He didn't think she wanted to go, but he somehow knew she would. She'd think it was the proper thing to do, and she'd probably also think it was what he wanted. Nothing, he was surprised to realize, could be further from the truth, and nothing could have scared him more.
Oof.
So now it's kind of like, I'm angling to spend time with Penelope. I was mad at her a minute ago, and now I don't want her to leave my side.
And he says to himself, he'd been reduced to a bashful schoolboy, hanging on Penelope Featherington's every word just for a single scrap of praise.
So she probes into the idea of him being a writer, and he never really thought about that as a calling for himself. But he realizes that he does get a certain satisfaction with coming up with just the right phrase. And he says he'd sat there for ages, surely a full half an hour, his pen poised above the paper of his journal, waiting for inspiration. And then suddenly he'd realized the temperature was precisely that of slightly old bathwater, and his face had broken into a wide, delighted smile. Yes, he enjoyed writing. Funny how he never realized it before.
And I'm going to break in here because y'all should read Julia Quinn's essay. Not only does it relate to this book and the Bridgertons, but it really, really relates to this scene. So Colin also admits to Penelope that he feels he's different from his brothers because they have a purpose in life, and that's why he travels. And he complains about how he hates that everyone just thinks he's an empty-headed charmer. He's only known for his ability to be charming and likable.
Penelope is having none of that. He is a wealthy man. He can literally do anything he wants. And so now she's miffed because she's like, next time you want to complain about the trials and tribulations of universal adoration, try to be an on-the-shelf spinster for a day. See how that feels, and then let me know what you want to complain about. And she leaves.
Excellent, excellent exit, Penelope. And Colin feels shitty for the rest of the day, partly because he feels he's harmed his friendship with Penelope, which, quote, made him feel worst of all since A, he rather valued his friendship with Penelope, and B, he hadn't realized how much he valued his friendship with Penelope, which C, made him feel slightly panicked.
And this whole interaction also brings to mind the incident, which even 7 years later, he has burned into his brain. So this is the incident that we referred to at the beginning of the story and that we talked about in the last episode. And Colin decides that he needs to head to the Smythe musical, yay, in order to apologize to Penelope. Now, quickly. Now, the Smythe musical is an annual event, and it takes place in a lot of Julia Quinn's books and is notoriously horrid. All the girls who are currently on the marriage mart in this family are given musical instruments, which they practice, and they play for the ton. All of which with a lot of passion, really terribly. I'm only telling you all this because it's integral to know why Penelope is there. Because Penelope is there. Because every year, there's always the one girl in the group that looks miserable sitting there. And Penelope always attends and sits up in the front because she wants that one girl to get a smile.
Yes, it's that one girl who knows how truly dreadful this whole thing is and realizes how embarrassing it is. And Penelope wants to support that kind of a girl. And I think Penelope obviously relates to that because of all of the citrus dresses her mother insisted upon, how yellow would make a happy girl when really Penelope would look good and green. Ugh.
Yes, and so Penelope is there with Eloise, Felicity, and Lady Danbury has joined the group. And they are talking about why they're at this event, although they don't quite touch on it until the oddest thing happened to Lady Danbury. Her face changed, completely, utterly, astoundingly changed. Her eyes grew misty, wistful, and her lips, which were usually slightly pinched and sarcastic at the corners, softened. She says, "I was that girl too, Miss Featherington," she said so quietly that both Eloise and Felicity didn't hear. But Lady Danbury only had eyes for Penelope. "It's why I attend year after year," the older lady said, "just like you."
Aw. And then conversation continues, and Lady Danbury says she believes that Penelope could be Whistledown due to her powers of observation. Penelope shoots back that she maintains Lady Danbury as her favorite.
Mm-hmm. However, Lady Danbury makes the point that anyone could be Whistledown, because if it were an obvious choice, people would have found out by now.
And in walks Colin, and the music begins.
Afterward, Penelope is walking with Colin, and she apologizes. Or at least she thinks she's sorry for storming out, at least. And Colin is like, no, you had every right. I was being a whiny little brat, and for that, I apologize. So she acknowledges he's entitled to his feelings and tells him he should do something about it then. Not complain, just do something. You're a man. You can do it.
Well, and not even like you're a manly man. It's like you have all of the advantages of being a man in this society.
Exactly.
You have the opportunity to do something about it. So it's okay to feel what you feel, but now go do something about it.
Exactly. And she suggests that he publish his journals. And Colin is not exactly on board with this plan right away, mainly because he doesn't want his success to be tied to the Bridgerton name.
And of course, Eloise then interrupts and they have a little sibling squabble, but both Penelope and Colin cannot think of a more fun evening that they have had out in a long time.
So a couple of days later, Colin stops by to see Penelope. He has come to tell her he believes Eloise is Whistledown, and he is out to prove it. She's been disappearing into her room for large stretches of time, and she comes out with ink stains on her hand. She says it's just a lot of correspondence, but he doesn't believe her. And so he's so preoccupied about the scandal of when it'll get out, and Penelope's like, it's not Eloise. Like, she could never hold that secret with me. Like, it's not possible.
And Colin is just totally livid. He's absolutely sure it's Eloise. She's such a busybody. She knows everybody and everything. And so it must be her. And he's not really listening to Penelope at all. And he says that the rumor of being Lady Whistledown alone would ruin Eloise. And so he's just so upset because he thinks that the rumor alone would destroy her as much as a rumor of Colin and Penelope kissing would destroy Penelope. And whoops, because now he said the word kiss and Penelope and he's thinking about it, and good God, he wants to kiss Penelope Featherington.
And Penelope, on that vein, boldly asks Colin to kiss her.
Yeah, something more.
And he's got like a shocked face and he's like, blah, blah, like fish out of water, like gaping. And so she immediately says to forget it. And then she says, no, I'm not going to forget it, she cried out. I've spent my life forgetting things, not saying them, never telling anyone what I really want.
And Colin is at a loss for words. And then Penelope says, please. Oh.
So he moves closer and he kisses her. And he realized that there were no words that could capture the intensity of the moment. No words for the passion. No words for the need. No words for the sheer epiphany of the moment. Colin Bridgerton kissed Penelope Featherington, and it was glorious.
Oh, it's such a lovely kiss, but unfortunately it is ruined when Penelope says thank you. Which makes Colin feel guilty and shallow, as if he had done this out of pity, which may have been the case a few months ago, but is far from the case right now. So yes. Colin is suddenly very upset, and Penelope doesn't quite understand why. She tries to make it better by saying she practically forced him, but that makes it worse. And so he leaves and she lets him.
So Colin is now in a broody mood, which is weird because he's not the brooding type, but apparently that's his new MO for this whole book. And so he decides to walk from his new place to his mother's place, which is quite a distance. And of course, as soon as he sets out, it begins to rain. So when he arrives at number 5, the butler suggests he borrow some clothes from Gregory, which Colin admits is probably a good plan. So he goes up the stairs and runs into Eloise, who is inquiring after his visit with Penelope the other day. Apparently the sisters, the Youngers, have been chit-chatting. And he says it's none of her business. And she concludes it must be about her birthday, which Colin is more than happy to agree with. Sure.
Yes.
However, the more she pesters him about Penelope, he decides to accuse her of being Whistledown to her face. Because if she's going to interrogate him, well, he sure as hell is going to interrogate her.
Yeah, well, that doesn't go well. And Eloise storms out, and Colin feels like shit after a very shitty day. At the next ball, there is new gossip on the town because Lady Whistledown has announced her retirement, which... I know, it's shocking in the extreme, and it was brought on by the fact that the Ton is going a little bit crazy to unmask her. And basically, she's just decided that she's bored and she doesn't like how people are acting, going crazy, trying to figure out who it is. So people are truly fainting and genuinely upset over this announcement. It's only a gossip column, Penelope said, looking around for any sign of sanity in her companions. Surely they realized that the world was not drawing to a close just because Lady Whistledown had decided to end her career.
Oh, people, the world is coming to an end because Whistledown has decided to end her career. In fact, Lady Danbury makes a beeline for Penelope to discuss the newest development. And Lady Danbury also, apparently in this conversation, has noticed Penelope's interest in Colin. And if he doesn't figure it out, they'll find someone better for her. Which Penelope's like, am I your newest project? Lady Danbury says, of course you are, darling. Of course, I like you. Yeah. You're my new project.
And as they're chatting and having a really like a heart-to-heart, our villain from book 2, Cressida Twombly, starts to gather everyone for an announcement. And she's just about to speak as Colin joins their party. He's had a terrible day, and he's just here to try to apologize to Penelope, but stupid Cressida is demanding attention to drop a major bombshell. Cressida announces that, surprise, she is Lady Whistledown.
Ugh. Everyone is in shock at this announcement. And Lady Danbury is like, lies. Because she does not believe Cressida is Lady Whistledown. And in fact, she's pretty sure Cressida was widowed like shortly after her marriage. And it turned out her wealthy husband may have given her a title, but didn't actually give her any wealth because he was fairly in debt.
Yes. And she just truly believes that Cressida is not smart enough or witty enough or clever enough to be Lady Whistledown.
However, Cressida is making her way over to Lady Danbury to claim her reward. And Lady D straight tells her to her face that she's lying. And then she asks Penelope's opinion. And Colin is ready to whisk her away since it's very clear, like, Penelope has a spotlight on her and she's instantly like uncomfortable and he can tell that she doesn't want to. However, the interaction goes like this. Miss Featherington, Colin said smoothly, moving to her side. You look unwell. Would you like to leave? Yes, she said, but then something strange happened. She changed. He didn't know how else to describe it. She simply changed. Right there in the Macclesfield ballroom by his side, Penelope Featherington became someone else. And she says to Cressida that she also believes that she is lying. And lets everyone know, I've always liked Lady Whistledown, and it would break my heart if she turned out to be someone like Lady Twombly.
Oof. So, needless to say, Cressida becomes enraged and demands an apology. And how dare this lowly member of society insult the likes of her? And Lady Danbury just insults Cressida more and denies her the reward. And Cressida basically says, I'll get you proof. And that's where they leave that.
Mm-hmm. So after Cressida leaves, Hyacinth and Felicity bombard Penelope and Colin for details, but Colin is being the knight in shining armor and assists Penelope in leaving the party because he can tell it was a lot for her to actually say that to her bully. Mm-hmm. However, this means he didn't actually apologize to her, which is the whole reason he went to the ball. He supposed he should have deemed the evening a failure for that reason alone, but in all truth, he couldn't quite bring himself to do so. After all, he'd spent the better part of 5 minutes holding her hand.
Aww. And after breakfast the next morning, Colin knows he's got to apologize. So he heads over to Penelope's house to do that. As he's arriving, he finds her entering a hired hack without a maid again.
gosh, Penelope.
And since he's previously warned her about traveling without a maid, he decides to follow her. And after a long time in the coach, Colin cannot figure out where she's going and is getting more and more upset at her lack of concern with safety. And eventually she ends up at a church, and Colin sneakily follows her inside because curiosity is getting the better of him. And he sees her walk up the pews and slip a piece of paper behind a prayer book. And as she rises up, he strides to her, and it reads, "Stepping out of the shadows, he strode purposefully toward her, taking grim satisfaction in the horror on her face when she saw him."
Ugh, Penelope tries to be glib and hopes that he's not seen what she's done by slipping the envelope behind the prayer book, but Colin has come too far, and he's strangely furious that Penelope has kept a secret from him. He's not sure why he's so angry with her, but he can't stop himself from going for that envelope that Penelope has deposited and ripping it open. Penelope let a strangled cry and ran from the church. Colin read the words, and then he sank to the pew, bloodless, breathless. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God."
And Penelope is hysterical as she exits the church because she has loved Colin for years, and she's so furious with this man who has ripped over a private document that she asked him not to rip open. And it's just not the Colin that she knows. And while she did read a private journal, it was laid open on the table, and now he has done something expressly against her wishes that was closed. So it's similar but different. And of course, her hack is also now gone because she was in the church for longer, and so she just sits on the steps and is choking back her sobs. And Colin arrives and just tells her to get up and takes her to his carriage.
Once they enter, he hands her the piece of paper, and it is the newest installment from the retired Lady Whistledown, with the ending statement, "Ladies and gentlemen, this author is not Lady Cressida Twombly. She is nothing more than a scheming imposter, and it would break my heart to see my years of hard work attributed to one such as her." Ooh. So Penelope is Lady Whistledown, and now Colin knows, and he is so mad at her. And Penelope tries to bring some levity to the moment and break it up, and Colin is not having any of it. And he tells her, "I am trying to decide what precisely I am most angry with you about," he said, "because there are so many things, so very many things, that I am feeling it extraordinarily difficult to focus upon just one."
And one of the points that Colin is feeling is that he thinks that she's been having a laugh at him for weeks as he's been insisting that Eloise is Whistledown. And Penelope really tries to assure him that that was not the case, but it seems to have humiliated him in a way. And however, he is a practical man, and what he is really most concerned about is that by calling out Cressida, she puts herself at risk for being found out. And so he says, "You had a perfectly good escape, just waiting for you. Cressida Twombly was willing to take the blame for you. And then suddenly his hands were on her shoulders, and he was holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Why couldn't you just let it die, Penelope?" His voice was urgent, his eyes blazing. It was the most feeling she'd ever seen in him, and it broke her heart that it was directed toward her in anger and in shame. "I couldn't let her do it," she whispered. "I couldn't let her be me."
Ugh, Colin insists she not publish it, but she's adamant that she will do as she wishes with it. After all, she's Lady Whistledown, not him. And he would love for Whistledown to disappear because all he sees are the threats to Penelope. And she has lived a society reject her entire time out. And so therefore, for her to be Lady Whistledown, the Ton will eat her alive. And that's all he sees. And as they're arguing, finally, Penelope gets over the fact that Colin is so mad at her, and she becomes everything she's been hinting at. And then something within her simply snapped. All her rage, all her frustration, every last negative feeling she'd kept bottled up inside her over the years broke forth, all directed at Colin, who, of all the Ton, was probably the least deserving of it. "No," she said forcefully, "you be quiet. It's my turn to speak."
Yeah.
His jaw went slack as he stared at her, shock and disbelief crowding in his eyes.
Yes, Penelope, say it for all of us.
I love that line so much. She's like, "No, my turn.
Yes. So the truth is that Penelope is really proud of all the work she has done as Whistledown, and she doesn't want her bully to get to claim something that she holds dear. And even if she does not get the credit, that bitch ain't gonna be it. And so ultimately, she turns it back to Colin. She says, I thought you believed in me, she said, that you saw beyond the ugly duckling. Her face was so familiar to him, he'd seen it 1,000 times before, and yet until these past few weeks, he couldn't have said he truly knew it. And Colin sees her for herself for the first time. He's known her for years, but this passion that she usually keeps close to her chest just transforms her. And he tells her that she's beautiful, and he kisses her. And he says, you are beautiful, he said, shaking his head in confusion. I don't know why nobody else sees it. Something warm and lovely began to spread in Penelope's chest. She couldn't quite explain it. It was almost as if someone heated her blood. And there's more in this scene too, more quotes that really make you feel good about Colin's kind of coming to Jesus moment of realizing how wonderful Penelope is.
I mean, I could literally just read you this whole chapter and like it would work. But
this is supposed to be a synopsis.
Yeah, exactly. So we're just going to synthesize it. They begin to make out.
Yes.
But also to connect in a way that they did not during their first kiss, which was like hesitant and unsure. And now they're kind of getting into it and they're just feeling that intimacy. And then they realize the carriage has stopped.
Whoops.
Frantically, they, Penelope and Colin straighten their clothes, and Penelope tries to say go around the block, but they've been stopped long enough. And so Colin's like, no, we have to get out because it'll look weird if we suddenly start going and then get out later. So Colin starts straightening up and like, he's out of the carriage, ready to go. He's like, okay, Penelope, let's go in the house. And she's like, you don't need to go in. And she voices her confusion to get the answer. There was certainly no reason he had to accompany her inside. Propriety didn't really demand it. And for God's sakes, Penelope, he said, grabbing her hand and yanking her down, are you going to marry me or not?
And Penelope is so shocked, she just basically falls out of the carriage. And while trying to make sure she heard him right, Colin essentially makes sure she's not refusing him and then barges into the Featherington house and past the butler, who's in obvious distress because it's Tuesday, which is the Featherington family meeting day.
Oh, yes. So Colin is going to go speak to her mother and instead runs into the whole family.
The whole set.
The whole family. Marriage to Penelope was an eminently sensible idea and surprisingly appealing as well, if their recent encounter in the carriage was any indication. His second thought was that he'd just entered his worst nightmare, because Penelope's mother was not alone in the drawing room. Every last Featherington, current and former, was there, along with assorted spouses and even a cat.
Oof. But Colin, the smooth gentleman that he is, takes this in stride and sets about just trying to clear the family out of the room. And Mrs. Featherington keeps trying to get Colin alone with Felicity so that Felicity and Colin can have a moment. And after much talking in circles, in which slowly each sister and their spouses leave the room except for Felicity, Colin just loses it. And he says, "For God's sake," Colin finally exploded, "let Felicity go. I need a private moment with you anyway." Silence reigned. It was the first time Colin Bridgerton had ever lost his temper in public. Beside him, Colin heard Penelope let out a little gasp, but when he glanced at her, she was hiding a tiny smile behind her hand that made him feel ridiculously good. And then Miss Featherington also tries to get rid of Penelope, and Colin insists that Penelope remain. And finally, when they're all alone, he asks Mrs. Featherington for her daughter's hand in marriage. And she is so thrilled, and she jumps up and starts screaming for Felicity to come back. Felicity, Felicity. And
"Why are you summoning Felicity?" Colin asked, rising to his feet. Mrs. Featherington turned to him quizzically. "Don't you want to marry Felicity?" Colin actually thought he might be sick. "No, for God's sakes, I don't want to marry Felicity," he snapped. "If I'd wanted to marry Felicity, I'd hardly have sent her upstairs for her bloody watercolors, would I? And Felicity is an infant," he spat. "Good God, marrying her would be like marrying Hyacinth." Except for the incest, Penelope said. He gave her an extremely unamused look.
Yeah.
But Colin has defended Penelope to her mother. And he's like, no, I want to marry Penelope. And despite Penelope's insistence that he doesn't need to defend her to his mother, she falls in love with him just a little bit more for it.
Yes, and so wedding plans commence. And Penelope and Eloise are taking tea one day, and Penelope is kind of making sure that Eloise is not put out by her marrying Colin because they've been spinsters together and it's her brother. And then Eloise also makes a very interesting comment about working on getting married herself. So, to be continued in the next book. But Colin arrives, and Eloise makes her exit. So then Colin pounces on Penelope. And in this moment, he comes to realize that he not only wants this woman, but he may actually love this woman. And this comes as a shock to him, but it also kind of wakes him up that maybe he shouldn't deflower her on his mother's sofa. So, yeah, he leaves making a comment about maybe can they move the wedding up because a month is really far away.
And Colin goes for a walk and ends up at his sister Daphne's house. And he asks her how she knew it was love. It's a very real moment between a brother and sister, and Colin is really showing a vulnerability because he has never felt this feeling before that he feels for Penelope, and he thinks it may be love, but he really has no idea if that is. And Daphne is not the most helpful person, but she does leave him with the idea of if he's asking if it's love, it probably is.
Yes. Very sweet, though. Love the Bridgerton family. And that night is the engagement ball for Colin and Penelope. And Lady Danbury is totally thrilled for Penelope and tells her so. She says, ha, 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 all these fools trying to figure out what you did to get him to marry you when all you really did was be yourself.
I love Lady Danbury.
Oh, I can't wait to see her come to life on the screen. She's going to be fabulous. But
I know. Suddenly, a bunch of newsboys rush in and start handing out the last column of Lady Whistledown. She's back, y'all.
Yeah, so Penelope has published the column that Colin found in the church, which exposes Cressida as a fake.
Colin is, of course, furious with Penelope, and she's aware of it. She actually had not planned it for her engagement ball. She had planned it for another ball, but obviously her publisher thought her engagement ball would be much more spectacular. So Colin maintains face even though he's furious, and he has this inner dialogue with himself. It was strange. He knew that Penelope was the one with the secret, the one with the most to lose. This was about her, not him. He knew that, intellectually at least. But somehow that had ceased to matter. They were a team now, and she had acted without him.
Oof.
Yes. And Colin asked Anthony to make his toast so they can start dancing, and then he and Penelope slip away because they're not going to enjoy this party because they got stuff to talk about here.
Yes, and talk about it they do, and argue they do. He maintains that he is not ashamed of her, despite the fact that that's what she believes of him. Colin's point of view is that if she is found out, the people that she insulted, the angry ones, will want to hurt her, and he's worried about that. But Penelope defends her position, and she claims this is her life's work, and that bitch is not going to get credit for it. And Colin has a realization because Penelope has a life's work. And he does not. And that is the element he's been missing in his life. And even now, his future wife has one up on him. And he's really tormented by this. And he thinks, she was amazing. He didn't know how he hadn't realized it before when he'd already known that she was smart and lovely and witty and resourceful. But all those adjectives and a whole host more he hadn't yet thought of did not add up to the true measure of her. She was amazing. And he was, dear God above, he was jealous of her.
Ugh. But he has also figured out how to tell you're in love because he's looking at her, and even though he's slightly jealous of her, he realizes she's just such an extraordinary person, and he's so happy. And maybe this then was the definition of love. When you wanted someone, needed her, adored her still, even when you were utterly furious and quite ready to tie her to the bed just to keep her from going out and making more trouble. And so This was the night they made love.
And first, they actually profess love. They both do. Penelope first, but Colin makes sure to tell her that he also loves her. And she had told him she loved him simply because she wanted to, because that was what she felt. I love you too, he whispered, pressing an intense kiss against her lips before moving away so that he could see her reaction. Penelope gazed at him for a very long while before responding. Finally, with an odd, convulsive swallow, she said, You don't have to say that just because I did. I know, he replied, smiling. But he just smiled, placing a single finger on her lips to silence her plea. I don't think you changed, he said, at least not very much. But then one day I realized I was seeing something different when I looked at you. He shrugged. Maybe I changed. Maybe I grew up. She placed her finger on his lips, quieting him in the same manner he'd done to her. Maybe I grew up too. So, because of that night, Colin got the wedding date pushed up so they get married.
Yes.
However, all is not perfect.
No, Penelope is convinced, even though they had this whole conversation where Colin expressly said he wasn't ashamed of her being Whistledown and was more just concerned about what it would do if it came out that she was Whistledown. They really don't talk about it. Like, Penelope is so excited because no one has ever known her secret. So she kind of wants to talk about it with Colin. But every time it comes up, he gets tight-lipped and changes the subject because really his jealousy is why he doesn't want to talk about it. His jealousy and his concern. But Penelope just keeps chipping away at it and eventually is like, well, if we're not going to talk about it, like, can we at least talk about your journals and how awesome they are? And I really do think you should publish those. And he's not really convinced, but then she says something that begins to change his mind, which is because she's talking about all her Whistledown columns. And he'd read everything she'd written because she'd published everything she'd written, whereas his scribbling sat dull and lifeless in his journals, tucked away where no one would see them. So this whole argument about Whistledown being published and him publishing his journals has now presented some soul searching for Colin to do. And he decides to let Penelope read a select few passages of his journal, which she really treats as the gift it is. After reading them, she tells him how much she loves what he has written.
And this leads to a moment of honesty and clearing the air. And she speaks a little bit about Whistledown and how she feels like he's ashamed of her, and he gives her an honest reply. He says, "Nothing could be further from the truth," he said, a burning intensity firing his words. "I think you are a marvelous writer. You cut right to the essence of a person with a simplicity and wit that is matchless. For 10 years, you've made people laugh. You've made them wince. You've made them think, Penelope. You have made people think. I don't know what could be a higher achievement." And so Penelope also then talks a little bit more about how she became Lady Whistledown. And it turns out that her father's solicitor had found something she had written after a bad ball, and he thought it was funny, and he was the one who came up with the whole idea. And so he helped her also put aside the money she had earned in her own account. And then she ended up using the money that she had gotten all these years to support her mother. When an aunt had died, they had attached all that money as the aunt's. So her mother got that as inheritance, and it was just a surprise windfall that this aunt had actually been rich. And so Penelope isn't as rich as most of the ton thought Lady Whistledown would be, which is another reason she has remained so secret and so hidden. But Penelope really supports the idea of Colin publishing his journals, and she offers to edit them. And so he agrees, and new marital bliss is found.
But it's not over yet, y'all. Cressida Twombly comes to pay a call one day when Colin is out. She knows Penelope is Whistledown because she never forgets an insult. And if you'll remember, Penelope said at the ball where Cressida announced she was Whistledown that it would break her heart if Cressida was Whistledown. And then in Whistledown's column, Whistledown said it would break her heart for someone such as Cressida to claim her writings. So she just sets out to blackmail Penelope and demands £10,000 to stay quiet. And Penelope is shocked, and she neither confirms or denies being Whistledown, but she knows she cannot pay Cressida. And luckily, she had already arranged with the butler to, make up an excuse to get Cressida out there, sooner rather than later. But after she leaves, Penelope is just so distraught, and she literally sits in the drawing room for hours until Colin comes home. And she's trying to think of a plan, but she knows she doesn't have the money. And Cressida will never be satisfied with just one payment. So when Colin finds Penelope in the drawing room, he immediately knows something is wrong, and she breaks down. Like, she starts sobbing, and she tells him the whole thing. No more secrets. Now they are a team. And he is like, I need to go come up with a plan. I'm going to have to tell Anthony, like, I got to go, though. And Penelope doesn't want him to leave, but he's like, no, I have to leave because otherwise I'm going to be worried about you, and I need a fix-it plan. So I got to leave the house really quickly. He's like, but be ready for Daphne's ball.
So the next night, there is the annual ball thrown by the Duke and Duchess of Hastings, which is Simon and Daphne. And so Colin sends Penelope to number 5 with the rest of the Bridgertons. And when she arrives, Eloise runs up and is like, what is going on with Colin? Because he has sent them a note that says that Eloise, Violet, and Hyacinth are to stick to Penelope like glue. And
like glue.
Anyhow, Penelope just kind of shrugs and says, I don't know, because Colin hasn't told her what the plan is. So they get to the ball, and Daphne is also very curious about what's going on. And Hyacinth really needs to use the restroom, but Eloise has to use the restroom. So who's going to go? And okay, Eloise is going to go first. By the way, she never returns, but Hyacinth and Violet are hanging out with Penelope when Colin finally arrives.
And he thanks his family for looking after Penelope and whisks her away to a secret room. And he tells her that they're going to announce at this party that she is Whistledown. And Penelope is so worried because she doesn't want to kill Colin's dream either. They just talked about publishing his books, and he's finally like given his okay. And she's like, but I don't want to ruin your dream. And then he says something lovely about he wouldn't even have his dream if it wasn't for her because she gave him a dream that he never would have thought of on his own. So Penelope puts her faith in him and allows them to make this announcement. And luckily, Colin has stuck them up at this lovely balcony that overlooks the whole ballroom. And he's even ready with a champagne toast. So he goes up to tell everyone how lucky he is to have Penelope in his life. And I'm just going to read words because I cannot do this justice. So, therefore, Colin said, with all of you here as my witness, I would like to say, Penelope. He turned to her, taking her free hand in his, and said, I love you. I adore you. I worship the ground you walk upon. He turned back out to the crowd, lifted his glass, and said, to my wife! To your wife! They all boomed, caught up in the magic of the moment. You might also say that my wife has 2 maiden names, he said thoughtfully. Of course you all know her as Penelope Featherington, as did I. But what you didn't know, and what even I was not clever enough to figure out until she told me herself, he paused, waiting for silence to fall over the room, is that she is also the brilliant, the witty, the breathtakingly magnificent. Oh, you all know who I'm talking about, he said, his arms sweeping out towards the crowd. I give you my wife, he said, his love and pride flowing across the room. Lady Whistledown.
My face is such a huge smile right now. I literally was getting so giddy as you're reading that. It's so good. Okay. So, of course, Lady Danbury leads the standing ovation. And
oh, yeah. She is like, they say the biggest smile anyone had ever seen was on her face as she clapped until the whole ballroom erupted in applause.
Yes, and then they go off to their happily ever after, and after disappearing for a few days to let the news die down a bit.
And we have a little snippet of an epilogue.
Yes, we do. Where Colin's book has been published, and they want to do a series of his journals every 6 months for each of the places he's been.
Yay! And Penelope is pregnant, and she's also writing a book called The Wallflower, which is a fictional novel that is slightly autobiographical and has a happy ending. 'Cause happy endings are all I can do, she whispered. I wouldn't know how to write anything else.
Oh my gosh. I am all aflutter after this book synopsis, and I need to cool down and get my thoughts in order before we discuss it. So shall we adjourn to the parlor?
We shall.
So today I would like to talk to you all about Bookstore Romance Day.
Zoe, what is Bookstore Romance Day?
Well, Bookstore Romance Day is a day that is designed to give independent bookstores an opportunity to celebrate romance fiction, its books, readers, and writers, and to strengthen the relationships between bookstores and the romance community. And I attended my local indie bookstore's Bookstore Romance Day last year. It was awesome and fun, and I look forward to this upcoming Bookstore Romance Day, which is far away, but it is Saturday, August 15th, 2020. And why are we talking about Bookstore Romance Day? Well, they have decided to separate from RWA as they do not approve of their actions over the holidays, and RWA was one of their main donors. So I also feel very much in support of their actions. And so we wanted to give them a little bit of a promotion here. And maybe you would too, because Bookstore Romance Day is really such a great thing for the romance community and romance fans. And we really want to keep that going. So if you're as interested in helping to promote Bookstore Romance Day as we are, we can help them achieve their goals. So we can donate.
Yay, donate.
They no longer have the RWA as a donor, and we donated, Tea and Strumpets donated. And if you would also like to donate, they are open for donations right now, and every dollar counts. So if you'd like to make a donation, you can head over to bit.ly/bookromday. That's BOOKROMDAY, and we will link to it in the show notes. So more romance, more independent bookstores.
Yay, all those things.
Yeah.
Also, normally we include a book recommendation. If you have a book that you would like to recommend, then please send us an email at romancepod@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media. We're on Instagram and Twitter at T as in Tom, N as in Nancy Strumpets. And we're on Facebook and Pinterest at /T as in Tom and as in Nancy Strumpets. And then if you search Tea and Strumpets on YouTube, you can find all our episodes.
And in light of everything that's gone on with the RWA, which is developing day by day, I just want to mention that we do have an article on our blog about that and some opinions from me. And there's also a lot of resources that can get you caught up on all of the happenings that are going on. But we would truly need quite a bit of time to devote to that. So that's not what we're going to do here today. But if you'd like to learn more about all of that, that is the place to go, romancepod.com/blog. And finally, of course, rate, review, and subscribe. That's how we get found.
So Zoe, what did you think of Romancing Mr. Bridgerton?
So I love this book, obviously. It's been a while since I've read it. It's one that I've read quite a few times because it's just such a pleasure and a delight to read. And I forgot how irritated I get with Colin because he really just kind of is this imposing, who does he think he is sort of type, right? Where he just storms into Penelope's life. She's been in love with him for so long, and then gets to be the shining white knight for her by taking her out of this terrible situation, by falling in love with her, and she's loved him for so long. But then he kind of stamps on her dreams and all these things. And on the surface level, it's that's all really shitty. And then at the same time, Julia Quinn is such a master because all of the little things she has in between, everything he does is either just part of his growth and part of his journey, and all of it is redeemed. Everything he says and actions does it just redeems him. So he's a little bit uncomfortable of a character for me and makes me a little bit uncomfortable throughout the story. And so does Penelope, because there's that moment too where Penelope, she like has that brilliant exit of storming out, right? And telling Colin, like, grow up with yourself in the beginning. But I even had that moment. It's been a while since I've read it, and I forgot that she ends up going back and telling him this. But I had a moment where I was like, hey, that sucks that you're just invalidating his feelings. Like, it's not, I get that those feelings seem very small to you and seem very, you know, crappy to you, but they are his feelings, and that is how he feels. But she then swoops back in and just nails it when she says, like, you know, I am sorry that I invalidated your feelings, but I want to remind you that you have the opportunity and the power to make a change. It's like, are you kidding me? It's like, it's so good.
I will say this too. Interestingly enough, as I was rereading it, because I have not reread it, and I had such fond memories of it, and I loved these characters, and I think I loved these, and then you love these characters by the time you get to them. Like, you already supposedly know them. And while I was writing the synopsis, I think this is where I like remembered why I fell in love with it. Because reading it, I actually was a little so-so, because you're right, it was a bit jarring for me to have Colin as that character where suddenly he's broody and he's high-handed and he's like all these things. But even Colin doesn't know where it came from, because even he's like, what the hell is wrong with me? And I think the biggest thing is, as you said, he's having his journey, and Penelope's having a bit of a journey as well, because as Lady Whistledown, she's had these, like, she's had an outlet for her wit and her things, but she's been hiding it from the world. And she's like, but I mean, with a little encouragement from Lady Danbury, she's like, what if I let it out a little bit? You know?
Yeah.
And writing the synopsis, though, I saw the journey a little bit more clearly.
Yeah.
And I saw that. And the thing is, like, even when he was furious, Colin was like, why am I furious? Like, I'm not this type.
Oh, it's so
and
good.
he even comments about how he wouldn't even know how to be a brooding hero, because, like, it's so not him. And we have to think that, like, as we see Colin, like, we see Colin just as Penelope's always seen Colin, as this, like, light, charming, handsome fellow that she fell in love with. And now she's getting to know the real person. And that real person doesn't actually, it's not like she completely falls out of love with him and then regains the love. Like, she's shocked and she's disturbed.
Yes.
But she still, like, that love still holds true, because she can recognize his journey that he's having.
And I do love, like, that's that kind of comment on love that Julia Quinn is making, right? About how it can turn you into something else, right? Like, that's what's happening for Colin. And there's like 6 different love stories here in a way, just because it's like, Penelope's been in love with him. She's had that like childhood love. And then she realizes that she's had him on this pedestal and that was unfair. And like she starts to fall in love with who he is now, not the idea of him. And that, and yet it is not this weird, like she shouldn't have actually been in love with him, or it's not just this absolute, like it changes. And I love that. And also Colin, who, you know, has this angry love and has this jealous love and then has this like accepting love and then realizes that the love makes him stronger. And
his, even just the journey of his love and the fact that like his love grows from it. And it's shocking to him, because this is the guy who's like literally been traveling the world to get away from his matchmaking mother in some ways. And
who's been trying to get him to marry Penelope all along.
And he just like, he so was like, I could never marry Penelope. But even he looks at her and he's like, why did I not know how beautiful you were? And like through with it. And it's little things like, he really valued, like, he's afraid he like ruined his friendship with Penelope, and he valued his friendship with Penelope. And that's huge to value the friendship that is there.
They have something really strong to build upon because they've known each other since they were young. They've interacted significantly for 11 years. Even if they weren't that close, that's a lot of knowledge about someone. And I just think that that is what gives their love story, you know, just that little extra oomph. The only thing also about the plot that I did not enjoy while rereading it is when Colin like decides he's going to go save the day. And he tells Penelope, like, you have to stay here because I can't worry about you and I'm going to figure out how to fix it. And I understand that the the idea is to reveal it to the reader also at the same time. So you have the big reveal, and it's a wonderful scene, and it is a wonderful moment, and I love it. But leading up to it and reading it as me and in today's day, I was like, I just don't love that she doesn't know and she doesn't have a hand in her unmasking. And I know that like all of their relationship up to this point has like built to him, like her saying, I don't need to be unmasked. I just need it to not be Cressida. Like it was never my intention to unmask myself. I don't need the glory. I accept, I feel proud of what I've done, and that's enough for me. I don't need everyone else's approval. But yeah, there was just something about it where I was like, but I fucking love that scene.
I think the way you can say it, like, yes, I think as in this day and age, you reading it, you know, you want the heroine to have like her own hand in saving herself in that sense, you know, since she does suddenly get put in the damsel in distress situation. However, I will say that I think what really lifts the moment up is the fact that Colin is setting out to save Penelope, but he saves her by revealing like this diamond that the Ton didn't know they have. Does that make sense? Like, and that's what I see about it. And so like, I think that while we don't like the fact that the damsel didn't save herself, I think that it redeems itself in the sense that like his speech is just the most gorgeous thing.
It is. It absolutely is. But it is just, it was such a weird thing because I was like, meh, you know, like I'm having, and the book gave me those ups and downs where I was like, meh, I don't like this. Colin's whiny. And then I was like, damn it, he needed to be whiny because otherwise I wouldn't have gotten the payoff over here, you know? And it's the same thing. It's like you couldn't have had the effect that we even read those 2 paragraphs and I had a meltdown here again. And it's like, we wouldn't have had that effect had we
not been on that journey.
Exactly. If he had just told her, or if they had decided together or something. I mean, I'm sure there's a way, but like the way it is classic. It is a classic, and it was a lovely reveal.
Yes. And that, speaking of that, okay, we talked about our ups and downs. But what would you give our hero as a rating?
Oh, gosh, this is going to get me a lot of flack. I still don't love Colin Bridgerton that much.
That's fair. Continue.
I would give him a 7. I think he's a great hero. I do not find him to be my favorite hero. And I think that's what bumps me up higher in the points, is that there's some of that, I love this hero. I love everything that they've done. If I have to rate Julia Quinn's writing, I give her like a 20,000. Like she's brilliant and wonderful in this book. It's such a masterpiece of characterization. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with him. I think he's perfect the way he is. I love that he's flawed, and I love his journey. I just don't really love him.
That's fair, because I mean, like I was having that same struggle, because like the reality is like I want to make him an 8, but the reality is he's kind of like a 7.5. Like there were lines where I just thought he got a little too high-handed. Like I really like him at the end of the day, but I think it's because like his internal speeches, and like I think the thing is because he never really set out to ever bring Penelope down. He never tried to do that. Even when he was having his own issues, like a lot of that was just misunderstanding between the two. Like he got mad at her, and maybe mad at her for stupid things, but he always was like, I kind of got mad at her for a stupid thing, you know? But he always was like very Penelope positive. Does that make sense? Like he didn't tear her down because he felt like shit. So for me, that's why he's like where he is. Like, but yeah, he's just not quite my favorite.
Agreed. Well, now we have Penelope.
And again, I really, really like Penelope. But there was something I felt like, and this is it, maybe it's just because like we've just reread the beginning books, and maybe they've been built up in those beginning books. Like we saw the glib, charming Colin who always had the right thing to say when, and we saw like the sly Penelope with the little wit here and there. But like something about Penelope, like even in moments where she would like have that flip of like, oh no, I'm poor Penelope, the reject of society, who was like, she was like, no, screw that. Like, I'm going to tell you my feelings, you know?
I love that part.
Yeah, I always loved those lines, and I was like, get it, girl, get it. But something about her really, like, there were moments where I was kind of like, Penelope, like, step up more. Like, you have more to give, so step up a little bit more. And so I'm going to kind of rate her the same. I'm going to rate her that same as Colin, like a 7.5. Like, I want to rate her higher, but I feel like there was just parts where I was really like, ugh, Penelope.
Yeah. So I definitely love her more than you.
That's fair.
I think Penelope is pretty spectacular. I don't think she's perfect. And I love her flaws because I do love seeing that butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. And I think this is one where it really pays off because she becomes exactly who she wants to be, which is herself. And she feels in the beginning like she's not herself, that no one knows, that she doesn't speak up, and she learns to speak up. And there are really lovely moments of that. And I just love her. I really do. I want to give her like a 10 because she's Lady Whistledown. I mean, Lady Whistledown gets like a 20,000, but
yes.
But Penelope to me is a 9. I think that I also wish that she had a little bit more oomph here and there, you know, and maybe stood up for herself with her family. But she also was always a peacemaker. You know, that was her. And she found the outlet for her sarcasm and her wit with pen and page. So
I think I realize why she doesn't rate as high as she does for you. And for me, it's because she had her transformation, like, where she was herself, but just as you said, she was always the peacemaker in the sense that, like, even when she'd kind of found herself in a way that she could, like, speak up to Lady Danbury and, like, speak up to Cressida Twombly, you know, like, she could do all those things as Penelope, she still couldn't, like, get her mother in line, you know, like, and because she loved her mother, but her mother drove her crazy, but she never actually, like, Colin drove that whole conversation where he was defending Penelope, and she never once stood up for herself with that. Like, she let him stand up for her, which was a great moment, but this is where I was kind of like, Penelope, like, speak up more. Like, where's your set down you gave to your mother? Because honestly, like, even if you love your mother, if she's literally, like, the man you're like, he just proposed to you, he's trying to get your mother to ask her, and yet you're letting her bring Felicity and demurely being like, okay.
I will say I also was sad. I mean, obviously, like, the announcement to everyone is such an incredible announcement. And I was sad, though, we didn't get more of, like, the reactions from people. Like, you know, we got very brief, light, peripheral reactions. And yeah, so that was a bit disappointing. But anyhow, I mean, like, I love Penelope and I love Lady Whistledown, and they are one in the same. And now we know.
Yes.
So we are moving on to our favorite quotes. And this is hard, huh? Because there's just so many. I'm honestly going to share a few because we've talked about some of them already, but I'm going to start off. And maybe this is why I love Penelope, because I think Penelope is has a lot of similarities to, like, Beauty and the Beast, Disney Belle, because of that song, I want much more than this provincial life. You know, when Penelope is literally skipping around the square singing something more, I'm just like, yes, I am Belle. I am on that hill and I want much more than this provincial life. Like, you know, I want adventure in the great wide somewhere. I want it more than I can tell. And I feel like, you know, Penelope also sees that Colin can do that in the travel. And anyhow, okay. So maybe that's why I identify with her. But back to my quotes. I have a few of them. So one of them is from early on, and it's Penelope thinking about herself. And it says, deep inside, she knew who she was, and that person was smart and kind and often even funny. But somehow her personality always got lost somewhere between her heart and her mouth, and she found herself saying the wrong thing, or more often, nothing at all. And I think that sums up Penelope pretty brilliantly.
I think so as well.
Yeah. So another one that I have, it just reminds me a lot of A Family Thing. And so Penelope is talking to Eloise and she says, I have my moments of charity and grace. One would think, Eloise said with a snort, that a vital component of charity and grace is the ability not to draw attention to one's possession of them. And I think that's really funny because my grandfather always would say, I am charming, lovable, handsome, and above all else, modest. And so that was one of his favorite lines. And so it just really made me think of him. So I liked that. And then I got to share another one. I can't help myself. So Penelope and Colin are having a funny conversation. I think this might involve an eclair. Mm-hmm. And she says to him, "You're a terrible liar. Did you know that?" He straightened, tugging slightly at his waistcoat, and he lifted his chin. "Actually, I'm an excellent liar, but what I'm really good at is appearing appropriately sheepish and adorable after I'm caught."
That's great. I think that really sums up Colin.
Yes, it's so good. And then finally, my last one. I know it's so many, but I think that this was part of the most brilliant parts of the book. And it's when Penelope realizes that she has held Colin on a pedestal all this time, and that the Colin who is now is not the Colin she's always idealized and not the Colin that she was in love with. Mm-hmm. And so she has to kind of develop her love into something more. And it's her thoughts. And she's thinking, he was haunted by unfulfilled dreams and secret insecurities. How unfair she'd been when she'd pondered his life, not to allow him his weaknesses. I think that's really important. I think a lot of the time we don't think about other people's perspectives and all those things. So a brilliant little sentence or two written by Julia Quinn.
Yes. So my favorite quotes, you heard most of them because I put them in the writings. But there was a couple I didn't add in, which were just like, my first one is from Lady Danbury. And Felicity and Hyacinth are like talking to Penelope and they're chit-chattering and they're being young. And Lady Danbury kind of gets them away. And she's like, "Ugh, those girls are just fools." And Penelope defends her sister and Hyacinth, and she's like, "No, they're actually quite bright." To which Lady Danbury says, "I never said they weren't smart," Lady Danbury replied acidly, "just that they haven't an intelligent thing to say. But don't worry," she added, giving Penelope a reassuring? Whoever heard of Lady Danbury being reassuring? Pat on the arm. "It's not their fault that their conversation is useless. They'll grow out of it. People are like fine wines. If they start off good, they only get better with age."
Oh, so good. Zingers.
Which I did love. And the last one is just a funny one I saw, and Colin was thinking it, and he said, "There wasn't a woman alive who could go from point A to B without stopping at C, D, X, and 12 along the way."
So relatable.
I know. Oh, that's my thing. It's because literally that's how my mind jumps. And sometimes it's like, where did that thought come from? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yes. So now we're at our steaminess rating and our encounter counter. So I would call this like a cup of tea with 6 sugars in it. It's very sweet.
Agreed. I was going to say it's a nice little cup, but I would agree it's got a little too much sugar in it. For me, that would be any sugar.
Yes, true. Agreed. And I absolutely love their love story. I love it. It's not steamy, but I love them falling in love.
I agree. I 100% agree. And our counter is like 1.
I think there might be 2. No?
I don't even think they
have the time at the ball.
And then
after their engagement ball, and then maybe there's something on a settee. But yeah, it's 1 or 2.
Yeah, it's not very much. I literally only wrote down 1, so like there could be another one in there, but I don't know. But that's okay, because the love story was the cherry on top in this book.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Such development. So feminist recap, I think we can just check off supporter because...
Oh, yes. Cha-ching, cha-ching.
Lady Whistledown, bless her.
Yes. But also...
in Lady Whistledown, we trust.
Yes. But also, as I said, even when Colin's mad, he's not mad at the, like, tearing down Penelope. Because we get a lot of heroes, like, when they're mad and they're having that conflict with their... Mm-hmm. With their heroine, you know, a lot of times we get the ones who do tear them down, you know, they they say bad things and they get mean and then they repent later. But like Colin never actually does that in it. Like he's just kind of like frustrated and angry because like their points aren't getting to each other. But he's never like, you're dumb.
This is true. He tries to be the kind of like overbearing hero, and Penelope pretty much is having none of it. He does a little bit of the barging, but like all of it is very consensual as far as like, are you going to marry me or not? And she's like, what? Okay.
I'm shocked by your declaration, but yeah, totally. I'll do it. That's no problem.
Yeah. Like not only am I in love with you, but I am practical and sensible. And yes. So yeah, I think it's super feminist. There's just so many good lines about speaking up, becoming something more, you know, finding your voice. There's so much that could be said about this that I think it speaks for itself. So we have our final book rating. And Kelsey, what would you rate this book?
Oh, I'm going to shock you. And I'm going to rate this book like a 10.
Wow.
Because like, despite my... like I told you, my characters, my concerns, my thing is like, I love the dialogue in this book. Lady Danbury is like my favorite person ever. Everything Whistledown says is fabulous. Like the conflict, like it takes you on a ride and there's ups and downs, but we get there in the end and it all makes sense. Like,
yeah,
it all, and everything is neat and tidy and in its place. And like our ending scene at the ball is just like, and yeah, like, and I think the thing is, if I just like right after I finished it, that wouldn't have been my rating. But writing the synopsis, it grew a little higher. Talking about it with you grew it a little bit more. And so now I'm like, oh wait, I love this book and it's still a 10.
Yeah. So I'm going to shock you and I'm going to rate this book a 10 too. Duh. This book is a masterpiece. Like, just because I have qualms with it doesn't mean that I don't recognize that this book is absolutely perfect the way that it is. Mm-hmm. Just because this book made me as a reader uncomfortable or irritated at times doesn't mean it's not fantastic. In fact, that's probably what makes it fantastic.
Exactly.
Because it has this whole trajectory and it takes you on it. It's memorable. It has so many payoffs. It is so exciting. It's so wonderful. And there is nothing that I would ever change about this book. I mean, that's a big statement, but I really, I mean, in 20, 30 years from now, I even think that this book is going to hold up. I think that this is such a good book and I am so happy we got to read it and to talk about it.
Me too. I'm so happy.
Yes.
But Zoe, what are we going to talk about next time?
So next time, get excited because we are reading our first male-male Regency romance, and it is The Soldier's Scoundrel by Cat Sebastian.
Yes, and not only are we reading this book, which is very exciting for us, but we will also be joined by Jeff and Will from the Big Gay Fiction podcast. Woo! Who are going to talk with us in our general thoughts and review of the book after the synopsis. And we're so excited to talk to them and get to hear their thoughts on the book because this is a reread for them as well. And we love when it's a reread and you get to revisit.
Yes, we do. But for Kelsey and I, this is the first time for both of us reading this book.
And this author. This is a new author for us too, guys.
Yeah, we are so excited and we can't wait to share it with you. So thank you for listening and join us next week as we read The Soldier's Scoundrel by Cat Sebastian.
And may all your ever afters end happily.
Tea and Strumpets is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. And you can find us anywhere you find podcasts. You would know that because you're listening to us. That's silly to say.
Excellent. You found us.
Great job.
Good job, guys. Okay. Also, say soldier scandal 10 times fast. Bet you can't.
You said scandal and it's scoundrel.
I said scandal. I could have sworn I said scoundrel. God, see? This is what I mean. You can't say it.
Oh my gosh, it's so true.